As you approach the gaming table, the figure of a monster takes shape. It's enormous and overstuffed, swollen to the brim with something that was once beautiful. You've heard this creature referred to as the Plot Engorgeatron. Now a mangled mess of plot hooks, complexity. It's the Overstuffed Gaming session. What do you do?
I use Charm Monster.
Invariably, there's some sort of figurative monster rearing its ugly head in our tabletop games. It's rare that we can slay these beasts outright, so instead, we use Charm Monster.
All right, so today, I come clean. Today, we're going to talk about the infamous worst session I have ever run as a Dungeon Master. Now, I want to make it very clear, going into this, that does not mean that I thought the players did poorly. That did not mean that I didn't have fun. Okay, I had a blast.
It just means that by the end, all of our eyes were red and we couldn't think straight.
So, here's how it went down. And you're specifically going to hear the details of the lost footage from Seattle, 2015. Now, I want to start this off by saying I really don't know where that footage is. I'm not hiding it. Like,
it's literally lost. That's not a joke.
Okay, well, no,
I think
is
Barker has it.
Okay.
No, it's Barker has it. But every time it gets brought up, somebody asks me, or somebody asks you, who asks me, who says Barker has it.
Gotcha. So, if you're listening for the first time, we have a group of people that we game with online, and it was awesome because we had the fortunate circumstances kind of line up to where we could all get together in person in July. And so this was awesome because James and I live in Florida. They live in, well, one of them lives in New Mexico, and then the others live in Michigan and Seattle. And we sort of all just converged in Seattle. And I volunteered to run a game for all of us. This was the opportunity of a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
This was amazing. I was so excited. And James and I were just fleshing out our world, our campaign world of Dragon Grin. And we were still figuring things out. And I was specifically going to run one of the groups inside of our campaign world called the Copper Jackals. And to give you an abbreviation, the Copper Jackals are sort of like Special Forces D&D. They work outside of the law, but they're still sort of on the side of good. So I had all of these players, these people who I love and respect, make higher level Copper Jackals. And I was promising a meat grinder. Guys, it's going to be a meat grinder. And I proceeded to run the most poorly paced, overstuffed session that I have ever run in my life. And it resulted in the last 10 to 15 minutes being a terrible info dump, kind of wrapping things up. Even like, let's say even like the last maybe say 35 or 40 minutes was, okay, I've got to cram all this in now. And it was a mess. And I will show the footage. I don't want it to be a slight against the players. That's the biggest thing. But I am genuine when I say I feel like it's the worst game I've ever run.
Yeah, and I played in the game, and to be honest, it was fun to play. Like, just in general with those people, it was a lot of fun. Even before that, it was amazing to make the characters together. We hung out, we rolled up our characters, we talked all about it. It was a great time. It's as much fun as you can have playing D&D. But specifically, as far as the story and the pacing of the session, yeah, I would say that it wasn't great at all. but that is about 25% of my enjoyment of playing in person in D&D.
Right.
You know, it's like, no, we could be really doing anything. I would have a great time hanging out with you and everybody else that we got the chance to hang out with. So, yeah. So basically, even despite it being a session that was not your best, it didn't damper the evening whatsoever. You know,
which is so great. Gosh, can I just say that everyone was amazing and everyone were just great sports. You know, overall, I think the main thing that I took away from it was if I had to sum up what I did, I try to take books and turn them into chapters.
Like a campaign.
I
put
exactly
it into
took
a one shot.
Yes, I exactly took what would be essentially a campaign's worth of plots, and then tried to have them all kind of converge at once.
Really cool plots.
Yeah,
really awesome. Like paced well, it would have been an amazing campaign of 10 to 15 sessions.
Yeah, even I could have spread it out evenly, probably over 10 if I would have done it. But I was so excited. Now here's the thing too. Did not ask for feedback. Not from a single person, because I didn't want to know. Did not want to know. I knew it was terrible. And let me tell you, these guys they're great role players. They're solid gamers. They're all super good DMs. So it was definitely not my finest moment. I felt bad that I sort of took up, I mean, we ended up playing for what? Like, was it seriously like 6 or 7 hours?
It was about 6 hours. I think that was, after about 4 hours, I think one of the cameras ran out of battery. Or space or something. Like the idea being that that's part of the reason the footage hasn't surfaced is nobody is willing to go near 6 hours of footage, watch it, cut it together, render it, you know, put it on YouTube. You know, it's the kind of thing where it's a daunting affair. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually we just released the audio because that would be simpler. But that, again, that's the most important part is, you know, it doesn't, in the moment, it doesn't feel necessarily like it's paced poorly. I would say the main problem, again, was, like you said, that it went on so long. We didn't necessarily expect for it to go on shorter. It was just that, you know, I think that you as the DM can be very critical of that, but the most important part being that we still had a good time. But to come back to sort of what happened, like you said, you overstuffed this session. You over-prepared for this. And today, that's what we're going to be talking about is, well, how do you know? How do you know when you've overstuffed? You know, obviously you didn't. So what did you take away from that?
For me, I took away from, I should have taken one core, interesting piece of that and focused on it and used the writing adage, in late, out early.
Exactly.
I spent way too much time on the setup and then did not let the rest of anything breathe. So then since there was too much time of quote unquote setting it up, well, what do I mean by setup? Well, if your players are infiltrating, do not have them start in an airship above the drop zone and then have them play a combat encounter down. And if you're going to do that, that's the session. Exactly.
That's the most important thing is this wasn't a one-shot.
It wasn't.
Or it was a one-shot, sorry. My bad.
Well, sorry, I thought you meant, I was like, no, it wasn't. It was 6 hours. I thought you were saying like,
yeah, okay.
I thought you were saying like, this wasn't a one-shot.
Saying,
this guy went on for, you know, a Lord of the Rings and a half extended edition.
Yeah, we planned on it for being a one-shot, so that's where that comes in is, you know, that opening part where we came in on the airship was so awesome. But like you said, you know, by the time we finished with that would have been a solid session.
And
it was awesome. It was
exactly.
Great. And then we kept going. We played the next session.
You sort of did. I tried to cram about 4 sessions worth into one session, and I focused on the wrong things. Here's the thing. Tip 1 to overstuffing. If you feel like you have one really cool idea that leads into another really cool idea, that's fine. But decide, in my opinion, which one gets the time and focus of the players.
Yeah.
And now, hey, look, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, dude, I play for 6 and 8 hours every week, that's my jam. That's cool. then these same principles apply. Just scale it up to 8 hours or however long you like to play.
Exactly. Yeah.
To me, that sweet spot, 4 hours.
Yeah, I think so.
3 is like, oh, that was lean and mean, and that felt great. To me, like a nice 3-hour session with like a 30-minute wind down is like 3.5 hours, maybe like some sort of chat afterward.
Exactly. Usually I go for 4 if the session is pushing to 4. If the combat ran a little too long or they had a lot of fun in the role-play encounter, like you still want to end at a good spot. So if your players are willing to go for that 4, it's usually,
exactly.
That's usually when I hit 4 is when I'm like, oh man, we can just finish up at 4 hours.
Right.
It's like I usually only push it a little if I think that I can get to a better stopping point.
Exactly. And that's something that you only learn through practice.
Exactly.
But here's a perfect example. It's the Copper Jackals, Elite Special Forces. I wanted it to feel like SEAL Team 6 or like, I wanted it to feel like the Marines and Predator and the helicopter. Sort of getting down to the location. Here's what I should have done in retrospect. If I could change it, instead of having that, because what I did was, I was like, I wanted to show that this is a mystical jungle island. So I put too many obstacles between them and the island.
Yeah.
That I expected them to kind of surpass quickly. So there was this enormous aquatic sort of ape-like creature that was supposed to just show that this was like, crazy, foreign, exotic. Well, one of them lands on it, and then like I just set it up poorly. So this drop that was supposed to be the first few minutes of the film, quote unquote, you're talking, we spent an hour.
Well, because that's the important thing is that we got a little role play when we started of kind of introducing our characters and talking to each other. That was cool. That was pretty short. For that sort of thing. But then the ship gets attacked. So that's the important thing is combat starts almost immediately, so it's going down. And then, like you said, the large aquatic creature comes out. So we are now leaving and, leaving the ship. We're jumping onto our flying mounts, which again, all amazing, awesome, cool stuff we were doing. And then we started fighting this creature. And that was the important part is we're like, okay, now we got to fight this creature. And then another creature came out. And then we were fighting them both. And again, all very cool, but like that would be such a good first session.
The session.
Bam.
So if I were to change it, don't be afraid. Now, we were playing D&D 5th edition. Some systems are even more conducive to what I'm about to suggest. Take that vibe and don't be afraid to tweak or alter the mechanics so that you can accomplish the same feeling, but consolidate it.
Exactly.
And, I can't think of the word. What's the word where it's just the essence
Streamline
of something?
it?
Not streamline. It's like if you just...
distill?
Distill it.
Yeah.
Thank you. You literally distill it. So here's what I want to say. I see you want to say something. So hold your thought for just a second because I want to get around to... Here's what I would do. I would say the ship is under attack. I want everyone to roll a d20 with the skill that you believe you're most adept at, to then narrate to me how you get from the ship, which is being shot down, to the drop zone. That way I would let them narrate each one, and depending on their roll of the d20, the higher it was, the more smooth it would go. The lower it was, the worse it would go. And I would probably dole out some sort of damage, like... just so that it would give the vibe that they were adept enough to where this is a common thing.
Yeah.
So this is more like, okay, you're going to get maybe hit, maybe scratched up, but it's not a big deal. I would even have put like maybe the creature in there and all that stuff, but I would let them narrate to me how they got to the tree line and the drop zone. Exactly. And then depending on their rolls of what they thought would be their best ability to get them there would be their outcomes. But I would make sure they all hit the drop zone. The roll wouldn't be whether to succeed, which is one of the other mistakes I made. Some of them fell into the water, and then that's a whole session, man.
Yeah, exactly. And
so
again, awesome. But
it was fun, but I should have been like, all right, good night. But the roll would have determined how hard of a time they had it getting to there, so we could have started outside the compound where I wanted.
Absolutely.
What were you going to say?
Yeah. Well, I was skipping ahead to where when we got to the compound, you did that very thing. You used a little different rules where we were really awesome and we drop in to attack these people, and we basically made short work of them because we're so good. We rolled, and exactly. For a few things you were like, well, tell me how you kill that person. It's almost as though we got a surprise round at first. and we just killed the first one. He dropped in, and we all got to sort of narrate what happened, and it was awesome, and really showed off how cool we were and a little bit of character. And in that, you did that very thing, where it wasn't like, all right, now you fight them, initiative order, one at a time. It was initiative order one at a time, but we didn't have many rounds of that combat.
No, because
it was pretty quick.
And I also made sure to put lower level, easy to kill things, and I knew you guys were level 10, so it wasn't. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat. I hate when people on a podcast have a frog in their throat and they don't clear it, and then the rest of the show it sounds like they've been eating chocolate.
He says with a frog in his throat.
So here's where it gets messy. So I guess I think if we're okay with this, I guess what this one will be is this episode. I'll just work through the adventure and what I would have done differently, and you played in it, so you can go ahead and help.
Exactly. This is like Charm Monster / DM Destruction.
Yeah. So the next explosion of awful. Now, again, the players are having a blast. They're doing it big.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Oh, I skipped the whole part.
I was gonna say, well, yeah, wait a minute, because a few more things happened between there. So go ahead. So all right. So we're fighting a gorilla aquatic creature.
All right. So well, you tell me what happens next, because I know what part I was going to get to was the tome heart.
Well, I was gonna say, so then another creature comes out. If I remember correctly, another creature that's very large starts, like the aquatic creature and this new aquatic creature start fighting.
Okay, so have you ever been in a situation and you think, oh, I'll put water on that fire. And then you realize only after you put the water on it that it was a grease fire. So my goal was, oh no, they're focusing on this aquatic gorilla looking thing.
We're not bypassing it. We're fighting it.
And I was like,
no, we're awesome. We're going to
kill
this guy.
And I was like, oh no, I've done it wrong.
You're like, no, this is King Kong. You don't.
It was supposed to look like a blend of like King Kong and Gilman, like. But I thought, oh no, I was like, all right, I gotta dispatch this thing.
I gotta put on this grease fire.
I did the George Lucas episode 1 where the big fish eats the there's always a bigger fish kind of thing. I'm like, oh, and then this water serpent python grabs the gorilla and pulls him under, and then.
Well, the other problem was, as Tim mentioned earlier, one of the players, Matt Click's character, fell off of his flying mount into the water. So it's not as simple as, all right, we bypass it. Now we're like, oh, well, we got to look for this guy.
See, already not cool. Already, they're an elite group of special forces, and I used this is my style now that I've learned. Yeah, there's a chance they would have fallen into the water, but they're elite. They're the best of the best. It is the smallest chance. Like, if they got shot in the head with an arrow, they still might make it.
And that's the thing, is he fell in the water. Yeah, he fell in the water because of one bad roll on, something he was dodging something. And that's the idea where, like you said, basically the amount with which he succeeded will scale differently because you're looking for that cinematic feel.
Exactly.
The idea is, he may have rolled a 4, but it's a level 10 best of the best 4. So he does it just barely. With a 4.
Exactly.
Like, he doesn't fall in the water, but he almost does, especially, again, not all the time, but if you're trying to get your characters through a specific thing, in this case, like you were, it's more narrative than, well, you rolled a 1, so I'm sorry, you fell off and you're lost in the water forever.
And that's it. So don't be afraid. I guess one thing you can do to cure this is don't be afraid to narrate.
Yeah.
But give consequences. Don't make it a free pass. Don't make it, just telling a story. That's one way I could have gotten around it. So then what happened? Then you guys got into the tree line, right?
Well, yeah, so then we finally, we got everybody out. We got Matt's character out of the water. We got to the tree line, and then this was the part you were going to go into.
So each of the characters was also holding a piece. This piece that they had sort of in their backpack. And essentially in our world...
I actually forgot about this part.
Yeah, so, oh man, I put so many things in between that I thought would be cool and fast, and then... Could have been mini sessions.
All cool, just not fast.
Yeah. Right? So, in our world, there are these creatures called tome hearts, which are essentially constructs that are made to store information. And they don't have sentience beyond basically doling out that information or fulfilling a function.
Exactly.
So, they look like empty armor. So with, pieces sort of missing, they don't have a full anatomical body. They look like hollow armor filled with sort of energies and things. Well,
Yeah.
I thought it would be cool if there was an elven version of this, because that's a whole nother podcast about where they come from and so on. But there are various types of these tome hearts, and depending on who commissions them, the builders often create them after the likeness of the person commissioning them.
If we're not careful, this Charm Monster is going to be 4 to 6 hours of Tim telling
It's
you
going to
one
be as
thing to
long
tell
as
you
the
another.
stinking session.
No, but seriously, yes.
So all of that to say, I thought it would be great if there was this kind of moment where they start putting together this tome heart and they realize it's in like an enormous gorilla that's designed for traversing trees. And it has sort of like, footsteps and different things that you can have, like footholds rather, and like side steps and things that you can like hold on. And I thought it'd be awesome if they took this ride through the trees on this tome heart.
So to, again, come back to this overstuffing a session, Tim had, think of where we started, us getting there, the big gorilla, this, and then up to the tome heart. He had all of these really cool ideas. In this particular situation, if you're running a one-shot or if you want something to be shorter, basically it's hard, but you have to choose which cool thing you want to do.
Exactly.
So it's like, that was really cool, and the ship was really cool, but the ship could have taken us to the compound, or he could have said, hey, you started on this island, you've put together this thing, or, something else cool, and then we use the gorilla to get there. But either way, it's like, in that case, I personally would probably have chosen one, whichever one I thought was the coolest. But that's one way to say, okay, well, that's where you can tell, okay, maybe you're overstuffing it. But so continue.
Well, and you're right. So pick the one cool thing you want to focus on and build shorter things around that, is a good way. So like one set piece or the thing players will talk about and remember.
Exactly.
Right? So, one unique identifier, if you will. That's one way not to overstuff. So I didn't. I thought, no, I'm doing it the biggest. We're in Seattle. So I did a bad job because I didn't foreshadow this enough since it wasn't the focus. They're like, okay, what is this thing? And it didn't have the aha moment I was expecting.
Yeah.
It sort of raised more questions than anything, and then I had to do an info dump. Now, once they got on the tome heart and it was like traversing the trees and kind of going, because there was this concept we had, which is in our world, it's called the ocean of trees. And it's that instead of a literal ocean there, the trees go deeper and deeper and deeper and for miles and miles, eventually in the middle having this crazy deep, dark ecosystem.
It's like a valley, sort of.
Right, so you can't, like a
in
very,
land,
very deep canyon, sort of, like a really far across wide, so it's an ocean of trees. So,
well, the important thing being, and the trees are growing in such a way that it looks, you can't tell that it's a valley from the top. It's a tree line. And so while it may vary in some areas, the idea is you would never know by looking at it how deep it goes.
Right, and so because of the nature of this thing, it's very dangerous. You can't just go climbing through them, and if you did, you'd probably fall, and there's a great chance of death. So this tome heart ape or gorilla carries them across. I narrated that. At least I did that right. Then they get to this compound where James was talking about it before, and you can tell I'm just kind of like, I'm spending too much time on the wrong things.
Yeah.
So don't forget, your session might not be overstuffed. It could just be that perhaps you as a dungeon master or game master are focusing on the wrong things. And if your players are actually wanting to do that, spend a lot of time in the town and roleplay, if they have fun, you shouldn't push through maybe and finish the rest of the 6 hours to finish your plot.
Exactly. That's the other, and we talked about that a little earlier, is I start, and usually the players have some idea of what a timeline that they're looking at, and I've had both things happen. I've had it where we're like, all right, we're shooting for 4 hours, and at 3 hours, they finished what was supposed to be the final combat, and I'm like, well, you don't want to start something new here, because then after an hour, you're going to have a really weird stopping point. You're going to be halfway through something. So you're like, all right, well, we're gonna do a wind down. Maybe I'll try and figure out something that, cover some stuff that sometimes we may not have been able to get to wrap up the session, but we're gonna end technically a little early. We're gonna hit 3 hours.
There you go.
Or in the other respect, like you said, where you're like, man, we are butting up against what everybody said was their latest, and we're not quite there yet.
Exactly.
You need to start, okay, then that's the perfect time to end on a cliffhanger. Because you can start the next session with like, bam. if you've ever read the Lord of the Rings books, the second book actually starts with what the first movie ends with. So it's interesting because I don't know why that happened or exactly, what was going on, but the idea being I like to think of my sessions that way, where if you're running Lord of the Rings, the first one, as a session, and you're hitting your time limit, despite the fact that, yes, in your mind, your players would cover all this stuff, there's nothing wrong with ending and, having them come back and just full force go right into this really cool thing to start the session to just set it off and then continue from there.
There you go.
Instead of saying, hey, can we just play for 2 more hours so we can finish what I hoped we would?
Exactly. So I'm going to fast forward so that you don't have the same feeling as my beloved players did. Because like I said, everyone stayed with it, man. Everybody kept role-playing and...
Well, and again, it was a lot of fun, and none of us... I think one of the mistakes we may have made was we didn't set a time limit. We talked roughly like, oh, it'll take a few hours, whatever. But again, we were all just hanging out. That was the most important part, is we BS'd so much. It wasn't like a focused, like, oh, we're playing and that's it. Like, we made jokes and we got drinks and we were having a good time. Like, it was just so much fun. I mean, solid 2 hours of that 6 hours could have been cut if we did nothing.
And that's play. What, and everyone was mentioning that. And I do agree that they were like, no, dude, you're cool, man. You're fine. There was so much, and I didn't mind it as a DM or a GM because we had never been together in person, so I really was actually instigating it.
Yeah,
like
and
joking.
So
there was tons and tons of table talk.
But that's an important part as well, is the idea that in this case, we didn't set a time limit. Had we, if you said, all right, we're going to shoot for about 4 hours. At about 4 hours, especially because it was so casual and we were hanging out, even if we hadn't finished exactly what we wanted, I think everybody would have been okay with, all right, well,
to be continued.
Yeah, like
maybe come up with a capping point or...
Exactly, like something cool. Even though we have no plans to continue this one shot in the future, it would be interesting to at least go over what would have happened, or maybe, if possible, we finish it some other time. It'd be a cool thing to always talk about, kind of, there's nothing wrong with that. We were having such a good time hanging out that... Yeah, we may not have gotten to the end, but is it better to, end and have the players come up with this really cool what could have been, or to rush the end of the session like you mentioned, where it's like...
Well, and even if I would have maybe paused it, I could have run a session. I think we plan on meeting again this coming summer. I'm not going to suggest that I run a session. It's someone else's turn.
I was going to say, in fact, because he tried to push through and get us to finish it, which, again, we didn't mind... if Tim said he wanted to run a session next time, I think that we would all at least jokingly tell him no.
And then that became a new measure of time. They're like, oh, like regular 4 hours or Tim's one shot 4 hours?
Yeah, exactly.
So here's the fast forward. So I'm going to give you now, spoiler alert, if you ever watch the footage, which maybe won't surface, which is why I'm kind of digging into this.
And you're not going to get to this point, I promise.
So in the end, all of these things were supposed to happen. First, I'm not going to tell you in the order the players experienced it. I'm going to tell you in the order that I probably should have done it so that this podcast has at least a good little kind of story in here for you. So, there is a force in our world called imminence, and it's the life essence.
Can I just say real quick?
You keep derailing me. You're making me... This is not Tim's fault.
It's not. This is the table
This
talk.
is what I... Exactly.
This is
what I had to put up with.
I shortened this in my mind. Good. I just remembered like 3 other things that we did before we got to the thing I think you're going to... So
isn't it called post-traumatic stress when that happened? Like, didn't you...
That is exactly what that is.
Didn't you literally black it out and make it...
Yeah,
4
like
hours?
you were like, you started explaining that and I thought, oh man, there was like 3 more encounters. I just forgot we ran. So, okay, so please continue. Right. I'll stop derailing you. But
so here's what happened. There's a force called imminence. And this force is essentially the creation force. It's the thing. It's ancient. It's long lost, etc. It was a jungle adventure, and there was this group that we talked about is particularly of the Copper Jackals. They are the elite force called the Blackbacks. The Blackbacks were supposed to go find the eminence, find out that it was eminence, it was in fact real, and then report back. The cause of the eminence was supposed to be a beholder. Now, this beholder, I was going to make him, which I think I played that right. I basically had 2 of the eyes open up first, so it looked like a tall creature.
Oh, yeah.
And it looked like they were talking to a creature with two big eyes, so I only had two of the stalks open.
Totally did that right. Like, that was
And then, like,
awesome.
the other eyes started to slowly open, and then one big eye in the center, and then it was like an aha moment, so I did that right.
Exactly. That was perfect.
Where it was like, oh, dude, it's a beholder. The beholder was supposed to be very, like, tribal, like, have this rough, dry, like, almost brown skin with just this tribal paint. Beholders are extremely xenophobic, according to lore, and they don't work with anyone. They're narcissistic, and this beholder, changed by eminence, was supposed to have realized that there's something bigger and essentially become a super force of evil in the world. Now, the eminence has strange power, and there are various things that it can do. I was thinking that he harnessed it, this beholder harnessed it, to begin raising the undead in the area. So I had the players, before they got to the beholder, fight an undead Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, that combat alone should have taken an hour, but I cut it short after it ate and ate. Didn't kill him, but it did chew him up. Then, when they walk into the chamber, I had James, and I worked with him from the beginning of this, betray the entire group.
Again, a lot of really cool ideas. Like, absolutely, there was no failing in the plot. It was just a matter of trying to fit a little too much.
Cramming it. No build-up. Just all like, boom, 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 boom. It's like if you had like a decent meal that you prepared, and then you had to eat it in like 30 seconds. You're just like sliding it all together and shoving it in your mouth. You're not tasting it all. It's just the act of eating.
Yeah, and you know it's good, but it doesn't matter. You're not going to taste it. Yeah.
So, I had planned this with James since before we went to Seattle, that his character was going to betray everyone. And this is actually his home, sort of close to his home continent or country. And he and his people revere eminence. And there was a scene actually at the beginning of the adventure where he, during the role play on the ship, put his hand on everyone's shoulder and said like
hellos. We hadn't seen each other.
Right.
In
So
a
it was
while.
just like
a little bit of role play encounter just for fun. Yeah.
And he made it a point. I was like, hey, you have to make it a point to say, I put my hand on your shoulder and I greet you. And so that was him basically casting a curse, an eminence sort of something. Like, basically I didn't have it all worked out, obviously. But,
yeah.
Which is another whole separate podcast. But the idea was this mark allowed the beholder to control them partially. This all might sound like, okay, that's not so bad. Oh, no. Nope, it gets worse. There was a piece of art that I wanted to use, and then there was another piece of art that I wanted to use. Isn't this terrible? This is a train wreck.
I forgot.
It's the worst. So, when James betrayed me, I had his essence basically ripped to pieces by the eminence, because the beholder, of course, double-crossed him.
Yeah, super double-cross.
But in his place, there was this piece of art I wanted to use by one of our good buddies, Gauntus, and it was just like this really evil-looking gnoll. I was like, oh, the beholder used it to pull the demon god of gnolls from the ether, essentially, or like an aspect of the god, and used James's body as a sacrifice. Now, mind you, telling you all this like this is much clearer because I'm expositing it, but in game they were like, what's happening?
And even I started to get confused because I'm like, I know what's happening, and I'm a little confused. I know what's supposed to happen.
Like, what? So there's a beholder. They just killed an undead Tyrannosaurus Rex. James betrayed them, gets levitated, ripped apart, turned into this gnoll that they're now fighting. And then the beholder starts giving this speech about imminence and all this other stuff, and then starts raising this beast out of a portal. So, oh man. It was essentially like it was a dragon. So this dragon comes climbing out of the portal. So now understand how bad of a job I've done. That this is what the players are facing. Not that the combat's too hard. It's like, dude, what the heck is this?
Yeah, like, how are you going to even keep this straight? Like, nobody can figure out, like, wait, where's...
What?
Who is what? Who's now?
This? So there's a beholder. There is this gnoll. There is now a dragon. And a recently killed undead Tyrannosaurus Rex. They have to fight all this stuff. And it's seriously now, we've hit like 6 hours and change. We're creeping into like 6 hours and 5 minutes. And I can tell like everyone is trying so hard to stay awake. It's like 11 o'clock at night. Their eyes are red.
Well, like we stayed up very late the night before and everybody's been traveling. Like it's just a lot of stuff. So we're all riveted and interested, but it's like, please Lord, just let us go to sleep now.
Please, God, let it
come
end.
on. Yeah.
So it's important to remember that their mission was to find out what was going on and then report back. Now, my goal was, it was actually going to be like a campaign starter was going to be, they were going to die. And one of the things that the Copper Jackals do is they don't ever leave anyone behind. So other missions were going to be to go and basically retrieve their bodies for a proper burial. So the players, thank God, had their wits about them. Are like, yo, we still got that ape? So the ape, and then I tried to like tie it into where the ape was charged with eminence and got more powerful to help with the fight, and that made it more confusing.
It was all very confusing.
So it ends like this. I think it was Matt who's like, hey, let's hop on this thing and get out of here. And everyone hops on the ape and leaves. I forgot one part. Oh my gosh. When they walked into the room, there was a bunch of other Copper Jackals in there. Oh my God. This is so embarrassing. This is the worst. When I walked into the room, there were a bunch of other Copper Jackals there that were supposed to be betraying them with James.
Yeah, so
this
again,
is like 2 seasons of a TV show crammed into one combat encounter.
Yeah, like...
Now, can I just say real quick that I didn't foreshadow any of this? That's one of the worst problems, too.
Because you didn't have the chance to. You never got the... You know what I mean? I'm like, because it was happening in that session, it was... You didn't give yourself the chance to plant the seeds
those things didn't
to give the aha moment. It was just... You were just, like, stacking stuff up. Like, you just kept adding more and more, and then eventually this tower's going to topple over.
That thing didn't even have a chance to shadow. There was no force. Those things didn't even have shadows. So, that's where the adventure ends. Now, I'm going to throw it back to you since I know I've been talking a ton, and I just wanted everybody to understand what went on in Seattle. But what can you say to kind of wrap this up as to how to not overstuff? You actually made a comment about how you do it.
So, specifically, there are 2 things. One, as a general rule of thumb, whatever it is I come up with, I realize that you multiply that by 0.5. Whatever you think, oh man, this session could be really cool if I do this, think, all right, well, I need to build in time for the players to actually do something. So about half of that they're going to get through. So I'm like, all right, so we're going to have a combat encounter, then they're going to meet this guy, then they're going to do this thing, then they're going to do this other thing. Like, all right, they're only going to get to the middle of this. Now, that's very vague, and, it's difficult to plot out, well, this combat will take a little longer or shorter. So what I like to do is I like to list all of the things that could happen in the session. I'm like, all right, so these are all the seeds I've planted. I literally make a list of questions that have been raised by the previous session, and I answer them very briefly. So, all right, who did this person get a letter from? This person. I put the person's name and a little bit about them. And then I say, all right, who knows about that? And it's really just a list, like a bulleted list in a Word document where I type all these things out. I don't plan for what should happen in the session. I just plan for all of these eventualities. Like, okay, what does this person know? What does that person know? What is this area? And again, I do that with, okay, so they can go to this tomb. So what's in this tomb? There are 3 rooms in this tomb. What's in each room? And I list it just very briefly. So then, as the session is going, I literally look. They ask a question, and on this list, I have an answer. Now, if I don't have an answer, usually, based on all of these little things that I've written out, I can find an answer. So if they're like, oh, okay, well, who can I talk to about this thing? I'm like, all right, well, who's in town? Okay, well, they could talk to this person. Bam. There's a college in the town, so now I make up an NPC that could tell them something about it. What this does is it allows me to, I don't plan for what I think the players will do. Like, I don't plan for, okay, this is how much I want to fit into this session. Instead, I go, all right, these are all the things they can do. And from there, I say, okay, we're going to take 3 hours. And then when we're hitting an hour, I'm like, all right, how much do we get through? What else can they do? You hit 2 hours and you just kind of take stock. And then by the time you have an hour and then you have 30 minutes left, you really, really, really have to start thinking about where this is going to end. If you're in the middle of a combat and there's 15 minutes left, you know that it's crunch time. It's time to, you got to figure something out because you still want to do a wrap up. So again, I personally have learned that instead of trying to fall into the trap of, okay, this is what's going to happen this session, because you have so little power over what your players are going to do, and by so little I mean 0 power. And not only that, but the fact that they'll never do what you think they'll do, just answer all of your questions. Answer all the questions the players could ask, whether verbally or, through actions, and then just play those out. And from there, I figure out, okay, I can never overstuff a session. The last session I ran, I did this, and I honestly thought that I would get through all of it. And I got through about a quarter of it, which is just a good example of, well, no, I didn't even get close. That would have been the most overstuffed session in the world.
Right.
So for me, instead of trying to, plot a session, I instead just say, okay, well, these are the things that can happen. And now what I've realized is I now have the next 4 sessions planned because of all the things that, have come up. And I'll do more prep and list more questions, and that will just feed my campaign until it's finished or forever,
Yeah, no. And so, yeah, I mean, that is a really good way to do it. I did not do that. I know part of it was me being overzealous, but I kind of want to wrap this up because I know it's going on, like we're up to like 40 minutes of me telling you this. Hopefully it's been helpful hearing what I did. Hopefully you're cringing. Hopefully you're hearing this, and if there's any echoes of this in your own games, hopefully you're realizing, oh, I do that. I did try to do that. I did do that in my last session. So let's go over a quick hit list of the things that they can do to not overstuff. So the first one is, don't be afraid to stick to one major thing and let that be the thing.
Exactly.
Whether that's taking a tome heart across the sea of
Ocean of Trees.
Sorry. Or if it's the particular drop mission, or if it's fighting a beholder. Let that be the thing that you budget the most time for, and realize that actually that's something I'm thinking of on the spot. The major stuff, consider that it'll take at least an hour.
Yeah.
And then realize that if you have players who do like to explore like we do, that's probably at least 30 minutes to an hour in itself, or role playing. Just budget it out and understand that if you put 3 things in it that would take an hour, you're not building in any fluff and you're not pacing it well enough either.
Exactly.
So
the other side of that is something else we touched on, which is make sure you have a time limit in mind. Make sure everybody is on the same page as far as how long you'd like to be playing. And if that changes, what's the longest they'll go?
Exactly.
Because that, like I said, in my system and in yours, allows you to give you that baseline. If your normal session is 6 hours, it's still possible to overstuff it. But in that same way, if you budget time for 3 big things that will take an hour, I'm like, well, now you've got plenty of fluff built in, and there's time for breaks and people talking and other things. If you, do that sort of time budget and you realize, oh, we're 30 minutes over, and that doesn't build in one moment of a player talking to another player, that's going to be a little too much.
Exactly.
It's all going to be rough ideas. You're going to have to sort of calculate on the fly, but those are good guidelines.
Yeah. And then a final thing, take your prep and just see what would happen if you cut it in half. Because a lean, mean session, for me, is more memorable and clear than an overstuffed double long one. Longer does not necessarily mean more fun.
Exactly. Or more stuff. Sometimes longer
exactly.
can mean, well, half of it was a combat encounter that eventually got old.
Exactly. So, now I'm not saying to cut your sessions in half, but I'm saying when you're preparing, think, well, what happens if I cut it here?
Exactly.
And what would it cause? Would it cause a good cliffhanger?
Because, again, if you ever are a little under, you can push a little further. It's better to over-prepare and sort of only play half. You know what I mean? I'll always prepare that big, what I imagine a session will be, and then usually we do half, but now I have 2 sessions basically prepared. So that is the important part, is like you said, see what happens when you cut it in half. If they, push a little into the next part, you can figure it out, but then you want to find that good cliffhanger spot.
Exactly. So we're going to close with this. I think it's ironic that our podcast on overstuffed sessions is longer by itself than most of our charm monsters. Here's how we're going to go out. I'm going to try to get a bit of vindication. If I could do it again, if I had to run the same game next week, here's a lean, mean outline of what I would do. Dropship would be very short, narration, mostly. The Tome Heart thing would be totally different. I would make it quicker, and I would have foreshadowed it before the adventure, perhaps with some sort of a debriefing or something like, use this tool, And then they don't know what the tool is, but they know they're supposed to use something to get across the ocean of trees.
Exactly.
So that there wouldn't have had to be any exposition. And let the surprise not be that there was a tool to cross, but what was the tool? Then what I would do is when they got into the compound, it would have began with the quick infiltration.
Mm-hmm.
But the next room, undead Tyrannosaurus. Final room, Beholder. Gives the Eminence speech. They fight a Beholder. Final plot twist. The Eminence brings the Beholder back to life and the carcass of the T-Rex so that they're sort of double undead, like Eminence undead, where it's like just terrible. And that would have been the final combat. Once they would have finished that, it would have been some sort of discovery, some sort of tablet, something the Beholder had to give them closure on the adventure, but still raise at least one big question, possibly a couple others.
Exactly.
That's what I would have done.
And that's a one-shot, man.
And it would have been way more interesting because there would have been breathing room in there for the players to do what they wanted.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I felt good to get out.
Exactly. I was going to say, the other thing is, tell any one person that's not in your game that runs games what you want to do in a session, and they'll tell you 9 times out of 10, nope, that's too much.
Yeah, man, that's too much. So, this has been Charm Monster. This has been the Overstuffing Your Sessions.
Overstuffing Your Podcast.
Overstuffing Your Podcast. So, if you like this, you want more of these podcasts, or you want other videos and articles and things, go to tabletopterrors.com. And in the meantime, may your dice roll high.